Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you a horror TV series named The Last of Us, Season 1, Episodes 6 to 9. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The latter part of the series begins with a rewind of the unknown fungus sweeping the globe, causing an apocalypse on planet Earth. When autumn and winter arrive, Joel and Ellie have reached Wyoming, hoping to find a cure to the fungus through Joel's brother Tommy. However, the area is vast and sparsely populated, making it difficult to find anyone, let alone his brother. After wandering for a while, they finally find a small, isolated cabin inhabited by an elderly couple, who are surprisingly calm in the two unexpected visitors. Upon seeing the quirky Ellie, the couple's last bit of wariness vanishes. Being familiar with the local terrain, the old couple warns Joel not to cross the deadly river in the middle of the forest, because the opposite bank is densely populated and might harbor numerous infected and marauders. However, Joel is determined to check the other side of the river. After thanking the elderly couple, Joel and Ellie set off again. They traverse snowy landscapes and wild grass, eventually reaching a green river. They decide to rest by the riverbank for the night, as the sparsely populated area is virtually free of the infected. Joel lights a bonfire, and the night sky reflects the stunning aurora. Ellie thoroughly enjoys her current life. Born in a quarantine zone, she can only learn about the outside world through books. Now, as they approach their destination, she is already considering how to enjoy her life once a cure is developed, while Joel hopes to find a secluded place with his brother, build a small cabin, and raise some livestock. As night falls, Joel tells Ellie to sleep while he keeps watch. However, the next morning, Joel wakes from his dream, only to find Ellie standing beside him, holding a gun. Joel scolds Ellie for not waking him up. The girl on night watch doesn't argue, and obediently nods her head. As they continue their journey, they soon encounter an iron bridge spanning the long river. Joel fires a few shots to test the safety of the area, and after waiting for a while without any response, he concludes that the opposite side is safe. They manage to cross the river, and Ellie can't help but mutter that it doesn't seem as dangerous as the old couple in the cabin had claimed. They follow the river and spot a dam in the distance. Joel tells Ellie that before the apocalypse, it used to be a large power station. Just then, a few strangers on horseback emerged from the hillside. Joel had no time to react before they surrounded him. The group were hostile, and they unleashed a hunting dog to check if Joel was infected. Joel tried to act calm. Although Ellie was immune, there was no guarantee that she did not carry the virus. As the hunting dog drew closer to Ellie, Joel panicked, but there was nothing he could do. Fortunately, the dog didn't detect anything unusual. Joel then explained that he was looking for someone named Tommy. The scene then fast-forwards to Joel and the others galloping on horseback across the plains, soon arriving at a human community. After passing through the protective barriers, the view changed entirely. It was hard to believe that this was a post-apocalyptic survivor camp. Compared to the desolation and chaos outside, this place was like paradise. Everyone's faces were filled with happy smiles. Joel looked around and spotted his brother Tommy, who was working on a house in the distance. The two brothers, separated for half a year, were finally reunited here. Joel couldn't help but tear up at the sight of his only remaining family member. The group soon arrived at a large restaurant where Joel and Ellie began to devour their food. It had been a long time since they had a decent meal. Tommy was overjoyed and formally introduced his wife to them. The woman recognized Joel earlier outside the town because Tommy often mentioned him. She had spent 7 years building up the community to its current state of popularity and prosperity. The camp had destroyed all radios early on, avoiding the attention of any forces. The community had already restored electricity 2 years ago, drawing power from the hydroelectric plant that Joel had seen earlier. Livestock breeding was also on track, making the place self-sufficient. Resources were distributed by a committee. After learning about the community, Joel decided to talk privately with his brother. He wasn't there to retire and enjoy life. His main priority was still to deliver Ellie to the Fireflies' headquarters. However, Tommy began to hesitate. He knew Joel wanted to take him away, but he had already adapted to his current life and didn't want to live a dangerous life with his brother. Joel persisted in trying to persuade him, but Tommy revealed that he was about to become a father. He was looking forward to his future life. Joel felt sad and said he would leave early the next morning. Amidst the bustling crowd, he saw a familiar figure, but quickly realized that his daughter had already passed away. Now, his only remaining brother might also be leaving him behind. At this time, Ellie was already in Tommy's home, having taken a warm bath. The room still contained many old items, and there were several clean clothes folded in the bedroom. Tommy's wife had prepared them specifically for Ellie. The young girl curiously picked up a transparent lid and only learned its purpose after reading the instructions. In the living room, a small blackboard on the fireplace displayed the names of 2 deceased children. After asking Tommy's wife, Ellie found out that one of them, a girl named Sarah, was actually Joel's daughter. After getting dressed up, the woman took Ellie to a movie theater, a luxurious activity in a post-apocalyptic world. However, Ellie didn't focus on the movie and kept looking around. Meanwhile, Joel was feeling down in the storeroom. Tommy brought him a brand new pair of boots, feeling somewhat guilty for his brother. Joel didn't continue the conversation, but instead brought up Ellie's background. The antibodies in the girl's body might save the world, so she had to be delivered to the Firefly's headquarters. This was also his wife's dying wish. Joel initially thought he could complete the task smoothly, but after experiencing many events on the way, he realized he was no longer as strong as before. Sometimes he even needed Ellie's help to deal with enemies. Continuing like this, he might one day endanger Ellie. The best solution was for the younger and stronger Tommy to continue escorting Ellie. After hearing this, Tommy remained silent for a long time, before agreeing to leave with her early the next morning. After saying goodbye to Tommy, Joel went to the room where Ellie was staying and saw that her face was full of sadness. It turned out that she had left the movie halfway to look for Joel and had overheard the brothers' conversation. Ellie had been an orphan since she was little and had always regarded Joel as her only family. Now he was leaving her behind, and the young girl was filled with anger. Joel looked into her eyes and then turned around and left. Returning to his room, Joel lay on his bed. The image of his daughter appeared in his mind again. Early the next morning, Tommy and Ellie packed their gear and went to the stable, only to find that Joel had been ready for some time. It turns out he decided to take Ellie with him after all. Ellie, as if expecting this, quickly jumped onto the Ferrari horse. Tommy handed his sniper rifle to his brother and reminded him to return here alive after completing the mission. Joel and Ellie left the community, and after this experience, he began to teach the young girl some survival skills. In the post-apocalypse, it was better to rely on oneself than others. Ellie learned quickly, especially in some areas where she seemed to be a natural. They rode their horses for several days, crossing jungles and plains, eventually reaching the edge of the city. The Firefly's headquarters they were looking for was located in a university town in the city center. Upon arriving at their destination, Ellie began to imagine the college life there, and Joel explained it to her. A group of monkeys suddenly appeared in their sight, and Ellie guessed they had escaped from a lab, indicating that the biology lab of the Fireflies wasn't far. However, when they arrived, there were no guards at the entrance. Joel gradually felt a sense of unease, and as expected, the hall was filled with scattered debris, but no people were in sight. A relocation list on a table indicated that the Fireflies had moved elsewhere. Suddenly, there was noise from upstairs. Joel slowly approached, and after cautioning Ellie, he forcefully opened the door, revealing a monkey. Joel sighed in relief. On a large map hanging on the wall, all arrows converged on one point, indicating that the Fireflies had moved to a sheltered city. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the window, and they saw several looters appear. Joel took Ellie downstairs, intending to sneak away. However, just as they were about to mount their Ferrari horses, a looter suddenly appeared. Joel dodged and grabbed the attacker's neck, taking him down, but not before being stabbed in the abdomen. As he pulled out the knife, several more looters appeared. The two quickly got on their horses and fled into the distance. Ellie fired her gun, eventually shaking off the pursuers. But Joel, having lost too much blood, lost consciousness and fell from the horse. Ellie checked on him, but there was no response. She was in despair because Joel had always taken care of everything for her, and she had never even worried about where to go. Ellie struggled to drag him into a nearby cabin, but left behind an obvious trail. Enduring the pain, Joel scolded Ellie and urged her to leave. Seeing that she did not budge, he pushed her away. After taking a look at Joel, she turned and walked towards the door. The moment she touched the doorknob, a long-forgotten memory came to her mind. Half a year ago, Ellie was a trainee in the quarantine zone, along with many other young orphans. Suddenly, a big girl stole Ellie's headphones. Ellie immediately threw a punch. As a result, Ellie was hit in her eye, and the big girl got multiple stitches on her face. The instructor in charge was quite exasperated. Ellie had already been put in solitary confinement 3 times that month. Those with poor performance would become low-ranking soldiers, doing patrol work daily, and might be killed by the Fireflies one day. Only those who followed the rules could become officers, living a comfortable life, and even being able to discipline people like the big girl. Without hesitation, Ellie chose to obey the rule. The instructor did not punish her this time, and even returned the confiscated tape recorder to her. After this incident, Ellie decided to be a rule-abiding good girl, and turned off the lights on time for bedtime. In the middle of the night, a figure stealthily climbed in through the window. The alert Ellie pushed the intruder to the ground and looked closely. It was her friend Riley, who had been missing for a month. Ellie was full of resentment because her friend disappeared without leaving a word. Riley didn't respond, and after silence, she said that she had joined the Fireflies. Ellie was furious, as they had been taught since childhood that the Fireflies were the root cause of the unrest. Riley did not argue, but stated that she wanted to show Ellie the most wonderful night of her life. The quarantine zone had always been under a curfew. The two young girls evaded the guards and walked towards the darkness in the distance. After arriving at an abandoned mansion, they climbed over the wall together. Ellie, full of curiosity, asked where Riley was taking her, but Riley just refused to answer, insisting that keeping it a mystery would lead to a surprise. In the blink of an eye, the two arrived at a hallway, with a corpse lying on the floor ahead. Ellie walked straight over to examine it, guessing that the person might have died from taking pills while drinking alcohol. She remained calm and even picked up the unfinished alcohol from the deceased. Suddenly, a loud noise rang out, and the body fell through the rotten pipe into the lower level. The two were startled and drank some alcohol to calm themselves down. Ellie had always harbored some hostility towards the Fireflies. The armed conflicts within the quarantine zone had all been initiated by them. Riley became somewhat silent. A month ago, while strolling outside at night, she had inadvertently encountered Marlene, the rebel leader of the Fireflies. The ideas Marlene shared resonated deeply with her, but Riley didn't reveal it yet. After that, the two girls climbed over several rooftops and finally arrived at a huge building. Ellie was surprised, believing that this is the mall that had been designated a forbidden zone by the relief agency. Riley nodded with a smile and then led Ellie through a broken hole into the mall. The curious Ellie found it just an ordinary power distribution room. Riley said that the surprise was about to come and let Ellie go through the door at the end of the hallway by herself. Ellie quickly crossed the room and arrived at the corridor. Accompanied by the roar of the generator, a colorful post-apocalyptic mall appeared before her. Ellie was stunned, having never seen such a beautiful sight in her life. The two soon arrived at an elevator, Ellie's first encounter with such a device. She was playing happily in the elevator when Riley forcibly pulled her down, urging her not to waste too much time there. The surrounding streets were full of shops. Although the merchandise inside had been looted, Ellie could imagine how prosperous the place must have been before the apocalypse. Riley suddenly stopped and mysteriously asked Ellie to close her eyes. Ellie was overjoyed, allowing Riley to lead her to a carousel. Ellie was both curious and delighted about something she had only seen in books, and even took out some wine to celebrate. Riley then began to explain to her. Under the rule of the relief agency, civilians in the quarantine zone had to perform tedious work every day in exchange for limited survival supplies. The purpose of the Fireflies organization was to overthrow the rule of the relief agency and return the residents to the life they had before the apocalypse. However, Ellie still found it hard to accept. She believed that once she grew up and became a manager, she could change everything. Riley just shook her head. It turns out that Riley had just turned 17 last month, but the task assigned to her was to guard the sewers. She did not want to spend her life watching others shovel feces, so she chose to escape and join the Fireflies' rebel force. Ellie became somewhat silent, realizing that things were more complicated than she expected. The two then visited every corner of the mall, experiencing the once popular photo booth. Although the printed photos weren't great, they still enjoyed it. When they arrived at an arcade, Ellie was utterly amazed. The various game machines left her dazzled. As the two girls were having the time of their lives, they were unaware that in a dark corner at the end of the corridor, a sleeping infected suddenly woke up. Riley excitedly announced that it was time to move on to the next stop. To her surprise, Ellie said she should return to the training camp, as she didn't want to miss her morning class in her pursuit to become manager. Riley didn't try to stop her, but had prepared a gift for her. Ellie lit up and followed Riley to a bakery where Riley lived. Riley took a worn-out book from her bag, which had Ellie's favorite collection of puns. Just then, Ellie noticed a row of grenades on a shelf. Riley explained that she would never use them on civilians. Ellie responded sharply, asking if a new recruit like her could make that decision, then angrily turned and left. Riley then revealed that she would be sent to the Atlanta quarantine zone, and that tonight was her last night here. Ellie felt sad, unable to understand why her best friend would abandon her. She then angrily stormed off. As soon as she stepped out of the corridor, Ellie regained her composure. She realized she shouldn't say goodbye to her best friend like this, and turned back to the mall. Suddenly, she heard a scream not far away. Worried that her friend was in danger, she approached the source of the noise. She discovered it was just a talking doll, the last surprise Riley had prepared for her. Riley finally revealed the reason for her departure. Having lost her parents at a young age, she had joined the Fireflies organization, and despite her short time there, she felt a sense of belonging like a family, which made it impossible for her to refuse any decision made by the organization. Ellie didn't try to persuade her to stay any longer. All she could offer now was her blessings. Riley decided to have one last celebration. With joyful music playing, the two girls put on funny headgear and danced their hormones away on the counter. As the music faded, Ellie looked at Riley, asking her once again to stay. Just as Riley was about to nod in agreement, they heard a commotion outside. Both girls sensed danger, and an infected person burst out, roaring like a goose. Riley fired her gun, but failed to land a deadly blow. She could only grab Ellie and run for their lives. The infected person quickly caught up with them. Ellie pulled out her dagger and stabbed the infected person repeatedly. Just as it was about to bite, Riley hit it with a club, entangling it. Ellie seized the opportunity and drove her dagger deep into the infected person's head. Upon her first successful kill of an infected person, Ellie was excited. However, she noticed that something was off. Her arm had been bitten by the infected person, and Riley's hand had a deep scratch as well. They now realized that they had to either end their lives before the infection took hold, or continue fighting despite the odds. Riley chose the latter without hesitation, believing that even if there were only several minutes left in her life, she would keep fighting. Back to the present time, after recalling everything, Ellie realized that she couldn't abandon her companions any longer. She might have been powerless to help Riley before, but now she had to do everything in her power to help Joel. She quickly found a thread in a drawer and began to stitch up his wounds. Although Joel's wounds were stitched up, he showed obvious signs of infection. Ellie stayed by his side, but this was not a long-term solution, especially since their food supply was running low. She mashed up the last of their dried meat and placed it in Joel's mouth, then took her gun and left the cabin. She looked around and didn't see any pursuers. Ellie walked towards the depths of the forest, knowing that she had to hunt for food as soon as possible. However, the cold weather, along with Ellie's insufficient survival skills, made it difficult. It wasn't until close to noon that she found a lucky deer. After choosing a good sniping position and recalling Joel's teachings, she pulled the trigger. The deer was hit, but it didn't die instantly. However, two strangers appeared and took the deer. Ellie yelled and appeared with her gun not far away. Caught off guard, the two men dropped their rifles and raised their hands in surrender. One of them claimed to be a preacher and seemed calm. He knew Ellie couldn't carry the deer by herself and offered to exchange supplies. Ellie asked if they had any medication to treat infections. The preacher nodded, saying that his town, Silver Lake, had some antibiotics. So Ellie agreed to trade half of the deer meat for the medication. The preacher then called his companion to fetch the medicine and dragged the deer back to the abandoned cabin. Ellie and the preacher sat down by the fire, engaging in a casual conversation. The preacher thought it was dangerous for Ellie to be out there alone and invited her to join him in Silver Lake, a self-sufficient resort created by survivors. According to him, this winter had been particularly long, crops couldn't grow, and wild game was scarce. A few days ago, a man in Silver Lake was killed, and his daughter wanted a proper burial for her father. But the preacher refused the girl's request, explaining that the ground was too hard, and that they would have to wait until spring to bury him. To help everyone through the winter, the preacher and his deputy went hunting in the forest, where they unexpectedly met Ellie. The preacher mentioned that he used to be a teacher before becoming a preacher. Upon hearing this, Ellie relaxed her guard, finding humor in the homophonic pun between teacher and preacher. However, the preacher became serious as he mentioned that the man who had been killed a few days ago was killed by a man accompanied by a young girl. Just then, the preacher's fellow suddenly appeared at the door with a gun. Fortunately, the preacher didn't intend to harm Ellie and instructed his fellow to throw out the antibiotics they had retrieved. Ellie didn't dare bring up the deer meat and grabbed the antibiotics before rushing back to Joel. Seeing Joel's festering wound, Ellie was once again uncertain about where to inject the antibiotics. Hesitating for a moment, she stabbed the needle near the wound. With everything done, all that was left was to pray and wait. In Silver Lake Town, located at the edge of the forest, the streets were filled with desolation. As two people worried about their dwindling food supply, a man walked in with fresh meat. Once the meat was prepared, all the survivors gathered in the dining hall. Suddenly, the door was pushed open, and the preacher returned with the deer. Everyone fell silent, wondering what kind of meat they had in their bowls. The preacher changed the subject, saying that he had found the man and girl responsible for injuring their people. He planned to gather a search party the next day to find their whereabouts. The deceased man's daughter rebuked the preacher for not seeking immediate revenge, but he responded with a slap and a friendly smile, telling her to show respect because he is her father now. Everyone remained silent until the preacher finished his prayer, and then they began to eat the meat in their bowls. The next day arrived. Ellie checked Joel's wound, which had improved significantly since the day before. She gave him another injection, opened the cabin door, and let the warm sunlight in. However, she had no time to enjoy the warmth as she started to shovel snow, needing to tend to their old horse. Suddenly, she noticed birds being startled in the distance and sensed something was wrong. She stealthily approached in the direction of the birds and saw several figures approaching, led by the preacher. It turned out they had let Ellie go out of kindness, but intended to follow her trail to find the injured Joel. Still, the preacher instructed his men to capture Ellie alive if possible. Ellie panicked. She called out to Joel, but he remained unconscious. She left her dagger with him, instructing him to kill anyone who came close. She then quickly ran out of the basement, moved the wooden cabinet to block the entrance, and rode the horse toward the preacher and his men. Her goal was to lead these unwelcome visitors away, giving Joel the best chance of survival. However, these men were no pushovers. They shot the horse, and the impact knocked Ellie unconscious. As the men approached to finish her off, the preacher fired a warning shot, insisting on taking the girl back to the town. He ordered 2 men to drag the horse away, and the remaining 3 to kill Joel. One of the men was lucky enough to find where Joel was hiding. He noticed signs of habitation and began to quietly move the wooden cabinet blocking the basement entrance. Although he tried to keep the noise to a minimum, he still woke up Joel from his unconscious state. As the man approached the blood-stained bed, Joel suddenly lunged forward and stabbed him in the neck. It wasn't until the man stopped moving that Joel released his grip on the man's neck. Soon after, the men searching for Joel realized that one of their companions had gone missing. As they looked for him, they fell into a trap Joel had set, and the remaining 2 were captured. After a brutal interrogation, Joel learned the location of Silver Lake Town. He was burning with rage because their people had targeted Ellie while he was unconscious, and he believed they all deserved to die. Meanwhile, Ellie had regained consciousness and found herself locked in an iron cage. The preacher believed that Ellie, on her own, would struggle to survive in this post-apocalyptic world. He suggested she join the town and start a new life. Ellie remained silent and ignored him. When the preacher left, she began looking for a way to escape. To her shock, she saw a human ear in the corner, and the preacher noticed her panic. Following her gaze, he saw the ear as well. Ellie immediately thought of something and looked at the chunks of meat on her plate, accusing the preacher of wanting to chop her up. But the preacher explained that she had merely knocked over a plate of deer meat. As for the other townspeople resorting to cannibalism to fill their stomachs, he saw it as a desperate choice. As the town's guardian, he couldn't just watch everyone starve to death. Joel had killed others to protect Ellie, and in that sense, the two were similar. Ellie seemed to gain some insight, and her emotions settled a bit. Seizing the opportunity, the preacher told her that from their first encounter, he had seen her as a natural-born leader, decisive and courageous. He knew that he would grow old one day, and the people of the town needed someone like Ellie to protect them. Ellie fell silent once more, then suddenly mentioned the injured Joel, asking if the preacher could spare him. The preacher praised her sense of responsibility, a necessary trait for a leader, and promised that if she joined them, he would agree to any conditions. Ellie seemed to be convinced and slowly extended her hands. However, she grabbed the preacher's fingers, attempting to snatch the keys from him. Unfortunately, she was pushed back by a heavy punch. The preacher, now out of patience after being fooled, left her with a cold remark, "Prepare to become dinner," before walking away. Meanwhile, Joel had already made his way into Silver Lake. Following the bloodstains left in the snow, he arrived at a remote warehouse. The place was filled with various useless items, including Ellie's backpack. It seemed that the townspeople had captured many survivors. As he investigated further, Joel found the corpse of a horse and, shockingly, several frozen human bodies hanging from the building roof. On the other side, Ellie had been dragged out of her cage. She seemed to anticipate her fate and, seizing a chance, bit the preacher. However, this did nothing to prevent her from being restrained on a large chopping block. Desperate, Ellie yelled out that she was infected and that the preacher was too, after being bitten by her. She then revealed the wound on her arm. The two men were taken aback, and Ellie grabbed a knife and knocked one of them down, before quickly escaping the room. Unfortunately, the door was locked, so she grabbed a burning stick and threw it at the approaching preacher, accidentally setting the curtains on fire. The preacher didn't bother with the growing blaze, but instead searched for Ellie, curious about the wound on her arm. Ellie picked up a dagger and lunged at the preacher from behind. Although she was thrown off, she didn't give up. She grabbed another dagger nearby and furiously stabbed at the preacher. As she pushed open the door to the dining hall, she happened to run into Joel, who had just arrived. The little girl finally felt a sense of relief. After surviving the crisis in the town, Joel and Ellie resumed their journey to find the Fireflies' headquarters. As they drew closer to their destination, Ellie became quiet, no longer her usual self. Joel seemed to sense something and began to strike conversations. He knew that the day they met the Fireflies might also be the day they would part ways. However, they both avoided discussing this topic, simply continuing their search for the Fireflies' headquarters. The pair soon enter an abandoned building and decided to go to the rooftop to survey the surrounding landscape. Joel hoisted Ellie onto the second floor, but as soon as she let down the ladder, she disappeared. Concerned, Joel quickly climbed the ladder to find Ellie, who seemed to have discovered something fascinating and was running around excitedly. When he finally caught up with her, they encountered a giraffe nibbling on tree leaves. Ellie stood still and watched. Joel smiled, picked some leaves, and handed them to her. After the giraffe had its fill and left, Ellie reluctantly went to the rooftop, where she saw several more giraffes standing in the meadow, like an isolated paradise. Seeing Ellie carefree, Joel was moved and suddenly suggested they not look for the Fireflies anymore, as their current life wasn't so bad. However, Ellie seemed to have grown a lot and felt that they should see things through to the end. They had experienced so much on their journey, and they couldn't give up halfway. The two fell silent again and started heading towards the lab's location. After passing through a tunnel, they came across rows of medical tents. Joel recognized it as an emergency medical camp established by the military at the beginning of the apocalypse. Joel pointed to the wound on his forehead, recalling that he had been placed in a medical camp the day after he lost his daughter, Sarah. Back then, he couldn't see any reason to live. So many years had passed, and now Joel could mention his daughter's name without any emotion. Ellie couldn't help but marvel at how time could heal everything. Joel, however, said it wasn't time that healed the wounds. Ellie nodded, understanding that she was the medicine Joel was referring to. She then pulled out the book of puns and began to joke around, lightening the mood. As the two were laughing and talking, a grenade suddenly flew towards them. They quickly lost consciousness in the explosion. When Joel woke up, he saw Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, standing before him. It turned out that Marlene was still alive after the previous attack and had survived her injury. Marlene was full of admiration, as she had traveled from the Boston quarantine zone to this location, losing more than half of her soldiers along the way, while Joel had managed to bring Ellie here single-handedly. Joel was only concerned about Ellie's safety. Marlene informed him that Ellie was being prepared for surgery. The organization's doctors believed that the fungus inside Ellie was secreting a chemical signal that made the bacteria mistake her for one of their own, which was the reason for Ellie's immunity. Joel was puzzled as to why the fungus inside other infected individuals did not secrete the same chemical signal. Marlene hesitated before revealing that the fungus inside Ellie had been growing with her since birth. She then began to tell a story from more than a decade ago. A young pregnant woman was frantically running through the woods, as if being chased by a terrifying presence. Stumbling along the way, she eventually found refuge in an abandoned house. Unable to endure any longer, she found a hidden room and began to wail in pain. Suddenly, there was a loud banging on the door outside. Just as she pulled out a knife, an infected individual broke in. Unable to move, she could only wait for the attacker to approach, before stabbing it with the knife. As she let out a sigh of relief, the sound of her baby's cries filled the air, and that baby is Ellie. However, the mother's leg had been bitten by the infected. That night, Marlene followed her trail and found the house, but the mother was already on the verge of turning. She entrusted Ellie to Marlene's care and lied that she had been bitten only after giving birth. Marlene couldn't refuse her dying friend's last wish and promised to ensure Ellie's safety. After carrying the baby outside, Marlene returned to the house and pulled the trigger on her friend. Ellie, who had been infected with the fungus in her mother's womb, had since possessed a unique immunity. Marlene told Joel that the Firefly's doctors were preparing to extract the fungus from Ellie's body and cultivate it in a lab. They hoped to soon develop a cure for the fungal infection. Joel realized that they were going to cut open Ellie's head for research, as he knew the fungus grew inside the brain. Marlene had to be frank to him that in order to save humanity, they had no choice but to sacrifice Ellie. She felt immense guilt because she had promised Ellie's mother to protect her. Enraged, Joel cursed loudly, but he was knocked out by a guard. Marlene had no intention of harming him and ordered her men to take Joel to a distant roadside. Under the escort of 2 guards, he quickly learned the location of the operating room. Seizing the opportunity, Joel grabbed the guard's weapon and shot both of them down. With his backpack on, he headed upstairs. He was determined to eliminate all the guards and rescue Ellie, who was in mortal danger. He showed no mercy to anyone standing in his way. When he ran out of bullets, he seized weapons from the fallen foes. With his shooting skills, he left a trail of bodies in his wake. He opened the door to the operating room. Thankfully, Ellie's surgery had not yet begun. Without wasting time, Joel shot the lead surgeon and quickly carried an unconscious Ellie away. As he reached the basement and prepared to drive off, Marlene appeared with a gun. She accused Joel of being selfish, asking how long Ellie would last in the post-apocalyptic world after his death. Furious, Joel retorted that it wasn't her decision to make. Marlene countered, saying that he should let Ellie decide what she wants. Joel fell silent, deep in thought, but as Marlene slowly approached, he pulled the trigger. He had made his choice. Between the world and Ellie, he chose the latter. The scene changes, and a groggy Ellie wakes up in the backseat of the car. Joel explains that the research at the Firefly's headquarters had failed, and they couldn't find a way to create a cure. After the lab was attacked by bandits, he barely managed to save Ellie. Now, with everything behind them, Joel plans to take Ellie back to his brother's quarantine zone. As their car runs out of gas, they find themselves not far from their destination, just beyond the mountain ahead. Perhaps to cover up his guilt for lying, Joel becomes quite talkative, even bringing up his daughter Sarah. However, Ellie seems to be preoccupied and stops in her tracks, looking at Joel. She recalls her deceased friend Riley, as well as Tess and Sam, who all perished due to the infection. All she wants to know now is whether what Joel had said about the Firefly's lab was true. Joel steadies himself and confirms it. As for Joel's final decision, it's understandable why he made that choice. The world did not become what it is because of Ellie, and not everyone wants to be a savior. As long as the ones they care about are safe and alive, the world is of little concern. When Ellie finally asks Joel if he lied, she must have sensed something. Deep down, she might have been willing to sacrifice herself to save the world. Otherwise, she wouldn't have mentioned her friends who died from the infection. But when Joel confirms his story, she chooses to believe him. This sets the stage for the 2 characters' separation in the 2nd season. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.